Hey there, just sketching in my notebook here alongside my artist friend Evan. Today we have a very special guest and we're doing something we don't normally do here at CTC. We're talking brand. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce to you a dear friend, one of my man crushes, Evan DeWalt. Evan, thanks for coming on the video podcast here.
Thanks for surprising me with this.
Yeah, so Evan is in town. Evan is an advisor to us at CTC, is also responsible for our logo and brand and everything that you see as it relates to our own brand identity. He's also one of the founders of EvoShield, an awesome company, who was actually our very first client. So this is the first person that ever took a chance on us. We like to say that we sort of tricked each other into working with it, but Evan has been essential in helping us, and I think he is literally one of the foremost, most incredible consumer brand experts, and not even really consumer product, any really brand strategic design thinking people I've ever met. And so today we're going to talk a little brand. So Evan, thanks for coming in.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate the intro. It's probably a little overinflated, but
yeah. Well, I mean, I have to make people think you're important. They don't have any idea who you are, right?
Exactly.
So it's not like they recognized you, you know. But so what I want to jump into first is, and we're going to try and create some connection back to what we do. So a lot of times what we talk about here is so tactical. It comes back to driving revenues and dollars and ROAS and all these things that are really granular. But at the base of that, it's sort of in the foundation of what we're trying to do, is this idea of brand. And so maybe you could start by sort of giving us your definition of what is brand, and then we can sort of talk about how that plays itself out in the process of building a business.
Yeah, no, I mean, brand is such a misunderstood word or misused word, and you know, a lot of people, brand means logo, and logo is obviously kind of an element of that, but brand ultimately is more encompassing of an experience. And one of the things that I always like to describe a brand is, I say that a brand, or your brand, is your culture on its best day. And one of the reasons I always describe it as that way is because ultimately your culture is reflective of, you know, what your mission is and your vision and your priorities and how you treat your customer and the language that you use. And it's your brand on it, the culture on its best day, because there is an aspiration, and that we all should be living up to the standards that we're kind of establishing with that identity and with the brand, but it also should be achievable. And I think a lot of times you'll find companies who want to kind of brand beyond their capabilities, and so they're either presenting to their clients or to their audience, they're showing themselves to be something that they can't deliver upon. And when you have that gap, it creates a really significant disconnect in which people either think they're being tricked or lied to, or they're kind of disappointed because they're under-delivered with their expectations. And so kind of making sure that you maintain that aspiration, but it's in a form that is actually achievable, that you can live up to this, you know, standard that you've set.
And that, like, so there's a lot of statements about what is brand. Brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. You know, there's all these different ways of phrasing it. Why I love that definition is because, you know, I'm a big believer, and we have a program here at CTC called Tell Me Your Dreams, where we help our employees to self-actualize their dreams for themselves and then build a path towards it. And I think what's so great about that idea of brand is it does depend on this sense of, like, hold the mirror up to yourself, define what you actually want to be, and then evaluate where you are in that process. Where I see what you're talking about, where sometimes people will say, we are the most innovative, advanced, technological widget A, and then you show up on the website and nothing that they have embodies that statement, right? And so there's this total breakdown for the consumer where they didn't have to say that. Brand can be a lot of things. It can be a great value, it can be fun, it can be playful. You don't have to be the most or the best or these adjectives that we sort of culturally get bound into becoming because we feel like it needs to be super grandiose. Like, it's more about your ability to fulfill it for the customer on the promise that you're giving them than it really is the size of the mission or vision, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's become even more important because there's no longer this disconnect. There is complete visibility between what you're doing and what you're saying, because you're communicating with your audience in that form. And so, it's not, the 1940s where you could just, Sears and put out an ad and that was the interaction.
Right.
And so you could have this kind of,
there's so many more touch points.
Everyone sees behind the curtain now, and so making sure that there is that connection between your culture and the brand is essential, because ultimately, if there is that disconnect, it all starts to unravel.
Yeah, and so that's perfect. So Corey, we're going to put up a slide right now from a presentation that Evan gives at his agency March 4th to help people understand what are the components that go into brands. So you'll see here customer experience, and you'll see your internal visuals, and then so what are the other two?
You've got kind of your internal culture is one, and then you've got your kind of product. You've got your external identity. And then you have your customer experience. Right,
and so each of these represent a category of brand that have to do with, to your point, all these different places in which the customer interacts with you, right? And when I talk to our designers anytime we think about brand, and that if you look at any designer's portfolio, there's sort of this like traditional grid image of business cards and letterheads and a hat, and this represents your brand identity. But the reality is that the comparison I always give to people is that, like, hundreds of people will see your business cards, millions of people will see a Facebook ad. So you can't say one is part of your brand and the other is not. Thousands of people will call your customer service line, and so you can't say that's not part of your brand experience. It's really understanding all these places in which you engage with the customer and how you sort of affect that. And so how do you get to these four things, and why are those the components for you that make up brand?
Well, I think one important thing is unpacking that word brand, because if everybody assumes it's a logo, then they're kind of focused on the wrong aspect of it. Because we can curate a great brand and never touch a logo and never even do an aesthetic, because you could have the most gorgeous brand and packaging and all that, and I show up to the store and the customer service is awful. That's a bad brand experience. And so you have to start moving the terminology away from kind of this visual identity, because you need to understand that you have to affect a lot of other things, and ultimately they all begin to play off of each other. And so you want to see kind of that customer experience. You want to, in the perfect world, you're seeing your visual identity play into that, and it's playing into the product, but the culture should also play into the visual identity, and the customer experience should also be affected by that. And so it's just this ecosystem, and making sure that you really understand all these things so that you can pull the levers that you need to for the audience and the goals that your business has.
And that's so true. So I think that when I think about a brand, and so for us to kind of bring this back to our tactics, right, is that we get to affect so little of that actual entire ecosystem of brand as your agency, right? And so much of the focus ends up being placed on the advertising, right? And so if the advertising isn't driving the revenue targets that maybe we want, a lot of times it's like, well, let's just keep changing this in hopes that it'll ultimately affect the outcome. But the reality is, to your point, you have to look at that entire customer flow, from the ad interaction to what they see on the website, to what the purchase process is like, to what happens post-purchase, to what happens when they call your customer service. Like, are all those dots connecting and building on the story or the promise that you're making in the ad, right? And so that's something that, the best brands in the world, and I think some local great examples that I think of, Stance. Stance, what their office looks like on the outside is what their brand looks like. Or what their office looks like on the inside is what their brand looks like on the outside. Their post-purchase email flow reinforces it. Their website reinforces it. It all ties together where there's no break in the brand where you go, wait a second, that's significantly different than the promise you made me over here.
Yeah, and I think one of the big reasons that I spend the time and talk to people about these multiple facets is because a lot of times people are trying to offload the responsibility onto an agency or a designer, and the fact is that the janitor in the building has just as much of an effect on what your brand culture is, because if you're disordered on the inside, ultimately that might result in delayed shipping, and that's good. And so everybody needs to know that in what they do, there's an opportunity to affect the brand in both a positive or a negative way, and so we can't just offload that and say we've checked that box because we have somebody who's working on our letterhead right now, because that's a drop in the bucket at the end of the day.
Yep, totally. And I think that we think a lot about, in creating brand, either for yourself or for others, in our case for other people, not to outbrand their capacity. And what I mean by that is that, to your point, if they're a small team that is, their personality maybe is, let's say, reserved and not very witty and fun as people, like, to go and then build for them a brand that is dependent on the ability to write clever copy and make phone calls fun and interaction, like, they're going to fail to meet it no matter how beautiful we make the presentation of the idea, right?
And I think it's also really important to understand that, like, everybody wants this quest for perfection, and the fact is it's all an evolving process. And you look at Nike's advertising or their messaging, and like, if you take it every 5-year period, you see this kind of evolution. And I think it's really important for people to kind of offload some of that pressure and say, we need to know this, a standard that we can live, a high standard that will force us to, progress and become better.
Yep.
But if we get there, that's amazing, and we'll move that bar a little, we'll refine this thing in such a way that we can, continue to always feel like we're moving forward, because ultimately stagnation is the worst thing that can happen with the brand.
Yep. And one of the ways, so a couple simple ways that we can give you guys to check this out. One of the things I've preached on here before, I'm a big proponent of, is shopping your own product. So this is what I would love for you to do. Go to your About page right now. Read it. Read your mission and vision out loud. Hold it up for yourself, and then go through the entire process of buying your own product and say, do I live up to the experience that I describe about myself? If no, where is it breaking? Go to your retail store, buy your own product. Experience your brand from an outsider's perspective, because that's so hard to do. You're so in it, right? Like, you believe you are this thing, and it's so hard to get an external perspective. Or give someone that printout of who you are and have them go shop for it in a way that maybe you can't even remove that subjectivity, but try and create an experience for yourself that asks, is the way I'm describing myself held up in the experience of purchasing my product? And that's a great one. So the other thing I want to do is we're going to show up another slide of Evan's that helps you to define from the top down your brand goal, your business goal, your messaging, your audience as a percentage basis to help you understand if you're focusing everything in the right direction. So describe what I'm looking at here, this slide of pie graphs, and how someone could fill it out and use it as a starting point for this process.
Yeah, I think one of the big mistakes people have is they don't understand that there is ultimately a constraint on their time, on their resources, and on their focus. And so a lot of times you'll find that people feel this need that they're going to put this infinite amount of energy into this infinite amount of exercises, and it can't be done. And so
it's overwhelming.
So you need to establish a priority, and by doing that, you can really start building out an alignment, both internally and externally, and say, like, hey, this is, looking at this business goal, this is where, it takes up 60% of the pie. We've got another one that's 30, and we've got one that's 10, and it keeps your eye on the prize of really what is the most essential, and then has this cascading effect that, if this goal is the most important, am I supporting it with the budget? Am I supporting it with the social channels that I'm using? Because will those channels play back? And if I'm going to make Instagram one of my more significant social channels, then am I investing in the photography or the videography? And so you start at the top, but if you can break this thing down into these finite quantities, it forces you to assign the priority and therefore the focus to it. And the number one pitfall that you'll find that people will do is they'll take that pie and they'll cut it up into 9 equal parts, and it's just saying that nothing's a priority. If everything is equal and everything's important, then nothing is important. And so it really is important to kind of understand that constraint.
So I think when you look at this sheet, what's so effective about it is it forces you to consider the future, to look way out and say, what am I trying to build that ultimately that dream visual of what is my house going to look like, and then it walks you through the micro steps of getting to what do I do tomorrow, right? To where relieve this overwhelm of, oh my gosh, my brand is so insufficient for what I ultimately want to be. How am I ever going to get there? And helps you to decide, in a world of constrained time, constrained money, what should you do tomorrow?
Yeah.
Right? And the reality is that like relieving yourself of this sense of I have to fix this now, and to your point, being willing to commit to continuing to evolve positively is really everything that it's about. And I think that this worksheet, if you go through it from your brand goals to your business goals to your audience to your channels, and each one assign a value and keep working down to figuring out, okay, what is that linchpin, what is the next step I need to do, will be super effective and is a great resource.
And you get to, when you're done with it, you get to hand it to people and start to see that if people understand where you're going, they should be making the decisions in alignment with that, because so often you'll assign a priority in your head, but if my number one priority is somebody else's number 4, the chances that that's going to actually be accomplished have drastically gone down.
Yeah. So clients, beware, we're coming at you with this spreadsheet to fill it out so that we can help get better aligned on our goals together and ultimately get you guys to where you want to go. Evan, where can we follow you on the interwebs? Do you have drawings out on the internet that I can peruse, or where can we engage with you?
I'm on Behance, behance.net /Evan DeWalt. But I've got a company I've broken out on my own. It's going to be called March 4th. So march4th.co. But it's still in progress, like all great brands. So.
And what we love about working with Evan is he calls himself the pre-agency. So in other words, before you're ready to come with us and scale, you need the foundation of working with him. So if you think that's your brand at an early stage of trying to identify your identity and prepare for scale, before you show up with us, head over and see him. It's as good as it'll get. Thanks for joining, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.